Tzadi Chesamid Beis were 4 lines from the bottom. Bishleima. We said yesterday is a Machlokes Tanoim. Which direction did the Shulchanos and did the menorahs go? According to Rabbi, they were east to west, going with the length of the room. According to Rav Shimon, they were going against the width. So the Gemara at this point assumes, we said yesterday that there were 10 additional Shulchanos and 10 additional menorahs. Let's focus on the Shulchanos. 10 additional Shulchanos. The Gemara at this point assumes they were in one long line. Now obviously, if you look in the picture of Art Scroll, they split up to 5 and 5 because that's the Gemara's conclusion. But at this point the Gemara assumes that it's all 10 across. The problem the Gemara is going to say is that if you go across the width of the room, there's not enough room. Right? If you're going in the length, maybe there's enough. There's still not enough room. But if you go across the width, how are you fitting? First of all, you can't really fit it. Second of all, even if you do, you now can't get to the Kodesh HaKodashim because you've now built a wall of tables. So it doesn't make sense. If you're going across, it doesn't work. Says the Gemara according to Rabbi, that the Shulchanos were east to west with the length of the room. That's how you could fit. By the way, also, not only, you have to understand, you also only have the second half of the Heichel. We said yesterday, the first half of the Heichel did not have any Shulchan or Menorah. So you only have the second half, which is 20 amas by 20 amas. So if you, and by the way, if you're in your quadrant, you're 20 by 10. So the Shulchan has to fit, all 10 have to fit 20 by 10. Now, if you go in length, each Shulchan is 2 amas. You got 10 Shulchanos. Okay, that's 20 amas. Fine. But says the Gemara, if you go by the width, it doesn't even work. The entire room is only 20 amas. It's only 20 amas long. It won't work. By the way, I'll tell you why it won't work. Even though you have 10 tables, 2 amas each. Anyone who's actually dealt with tables knows it's not, you got to have a little bit of room. You can't have it. So if you're telling me that you have a whole room to play with, fine. But if you're dealing with just 20 amas and each table is 2 amas, you can't get 10 tables in. It's impossible. So it says the Gemara. The Gemara says. So first, that's the issue. Visu, by the way, even if you were to tell me that you got 10 across, you somehow squeezed in 10 across. How are you getting to the Kodesh HaKodashim now? You've created Kaihanim Heichi Avil. How do you get there? And by the way, as we're going to see in a moment, when they put the bread on the shulchan, it was a ceremony. Think of it like soldiers, it was a ceremony. I have the old, you have the new bread, I have the old bread, standing on either side of the table. So you can't have a wall. I have to be able to get to the other side. Visu, and by the way, is a bigger problem. It's not 10 tables. It's 11. It's 10 in addition to Moshe. So I definitely can't get 11 tables. If each table is 2 amas and the length is the width is 20, I can't get 11 tables in there. That math is not mathing. It just doesn't work. Even the left, by the way, it wouldn't work because you're going past the halfway point. You're supposed to only have it in the last 20 amas. So it still doesn't work. And the Gemara points it out. And by the way, also, not only does it not work widthwise, you're also supposed to only have the shulchan in one side of the room. If you go across, that means the shulchanos are now on the left side of the room with the menorahs. The shulchanos are supposed to be in one quadrant of the room. They're supposed to be on the right side when you walk in, top right. If they go across, that means that they're touching the menorahs. It doesn't work. So it says the Gemara, and according to you, that it goes lengthwise. It still doesn't fit because you have to have it in the second half of the room, which is 20 amas, but you got 11 tables, which is 22 amas in length. It still doesn't work. So the Gemara answers, you misunderstood. It's not one long line. It says, our scroll pictures it. It's 5, and Moshe is in the center. And that way it fits because you only need the length of 5 tables, which is 10 amas. So that works. So says the Gemara. No, it doesn't matter the way it is. You're only doing 5 in a row. It works both ways. It works if it's the length, and it works if it's the width. It's a machlokes Rabbi and Rav Shimon. I'm saying it's machlokes. But my point is, if you're telling me now that it's only 5 and 5 with Moshe's in the center, it works. And our scroll has pictures, has a diagram of how it works, fine. It says the Gemara, there were 2 rows of tables. Now, the Gemara just quickly points out one last issue. I'm just going to say this outside. If our scroll has a picture, which I think is very helpful, on 98.5b. But I'll just tell you very, very practical what it is. If you believe that it's lengthwise, it doesn't work. It still doesn't work. I'll tell you why. You have a row of 5 tables, Moshe, and then another row of 5 tables. So if you have 3 rows of tables, but here's the issue. In order to make enough room for men to walk around the tables, there has to be 2.5 amas in between each row. We saw this yesterday with Aaron. You need 2.5 amas in order to fit 2 people. So just think about the math. You have to get everything in the top right quadrant, which is 10 amas wide. Now let's do the math. You have the wall, 2.5 amas, love it, 2.5 amas. The first row of tables are an amma wide, so it's 2.5 plus 1 is 3.5. You need 2.5 amas to make room between those row of tables and Moshe's. So 2.5 plus 1, 3.5 plus 2.5, which is 6. Moshe Rabbeinu's tables in the center, that's another amma, that's 7, plus 2.5, which is 9.5, plus another row, which is 10.5. You need to fit it within 10. It's 1/2 sticking over. They make the diagram, but Bekitzer, if you have a row, you have Moshe's in the center, you have another row, and in between each shulchan row, you need 2.5 amas. You'll dip over. You're sticking over to the other side. It doesn't work. So it says the Gemara, according to Rav of Shimon, that it was going across the width. Then we don't have this issue. But it says the Gemara Shapir, but according to the opinion that it's across the east to west, so the problem is michdi. It doesn't work. It's going to be dipping over a 1/2 amma. Why? Shulchan kama mashach menachos. So you have the wall, and then how much space till the first row? Shtei amas umechza, 2.5 amas, because that's the minimum amount to allow the kahanim to walk around. Amma didei. Then you have 1 amma of the width of the first rows. Shtei amas umechza debeini beini. Then you have to have another 2.5 amas till Moshe Rabbeinu's shulchan. The amma of Moshe Rabbeinu's shulchan. Then shtei amas umechza debeini beini. Then another 2.5 amas between Moshe Rabbeinu's shulchan and the last row of tables. The amma didei, and the amma of the last row is shtokik de ka'achol shulchan palgad amsa bedarim. That means that the row of shulchanos will be a 1/2 amma sticking over into the south side. It does not work. So the Gemara responds, you misunderstand. Moshe Rabbeinu's is not in the center. Moshe Rabbeinu's is in the front. So you have these 2 rows, and then you have Moshe's, which is outside of it. So therefore, between the 2 rows, you don't need the full length of area. If Moshe Rabbeinu's is in the center of a formation, right? You have, here's one row, this is one set of shulchan. If Moshe's is in the center, then I need enough space between this shulchan and this shulchan to get to Moshe's. The answer is Moshe's is not there. Moshe's is in the front. Everything's a little tighter. I only need 1 space in between, and Moshe's is sticking out. Moshe's is outside of the row. So you have a row here, row here. Moshe's is not in the middle. Moshe's is in the front, like a missile. So Moshe Rabbeinu's is outside, so I don't need so much space in between the 2 rows because I don't have to maneuver to get to Moshe's inside. Moshe's is outside of the 2 rows. So it says the Gemara, Mi sabred shulchan the Moshe ba'adayu haviyasi iloi demidli lei umanach lei umitati lei depurta. It was outside in front, kital mediyashel fnei Rabbi, and all the other shulchanos were like students in front of the Rebbe. So the Rebbe's sitting in front and like teaching these 2 rows of shulchanos. Now, so we're going to get to that one right now. That's this Gemara. Tan Rabbanan asara shulchanos. Asa Shloima HaMelech made an additional 10 shulchanos. V'lo hayu mesadrin ela shel Moshe, but they never used them. They only used Moshe Rabbeinu's. So according to the Tanakama, those 10 sat empty, and they only used Moshe Rabbeinu's, similar to the menorah. Shenemar es hashulchan asher alav lechem aponim zahab. The shulchan, only 1 shulchan was used. Similarly, regarding the menorah, Esther menorahs. Asa Shloima Melech made an additional 10 menorahs. V'lo hayu madlikin ela b'shel Moshe, but they never used them. Shenemar menorahs hazahav v'neiroseha levar be'erev. Menorahs is 1, singular. Good. Says the Gemara, that's the Tanakama Shita. Rav Elazar ben Shammua disagrees. He says, no, al kulam hayu misajrin. Now, what does that mean, al kulam hayu misajrin? So I'll tell you, Rashi over here says it does not mean they had 11 sets of lechem aponim, because he felt that would be baltoisiv. You can't have 11. What it means is, Rashi says, it means each week, dealer's choice. whatever the Kohanim wanted to use, sometimes Moshe's, sometimes Shloimeh's. Every week was a different shulchan. It sounds like there was no order. It's whatever they wanted. Now there is the Targum Onkelos. The Targum actually is mevar on the pasuk that they put 11, but Pashtus, it's not Rashi's pshat over here. Rashi says every shulchan was usable. Each week they used a different shulchan. Maybe they had a rotation. Maybe it was just Ruach HaKodesh, whatever the Kohanim wanted. But they did not use the same shulchan every single time. Sometimes Moshe, sometimes Shloimeh. That's Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua's opinion. Shneimar, what's his source that they used multiple shulchanos were an option? Es hashulchanos, which is plural. V'aleim lechem aponim. Ubekulon hayu and similarly with the menorah, each week was a different menorah. Sometimes Moshe's, sometimes Shloimeh's. Each one was different. Shneimar, es hamenoras v'neiroi seihem levar k'mishpatim v'nei hadvir zav sagar. The pasuk says as a menorahs, which is plural. Now, Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda explains, how does the Tanna Kama deal with this pasuk? The pasuk says Shulchan Ais. Shulchan Ais implies that there were multiple shulchans that were used. I thought according to the Tanna Kama, they only used Moshe Rabbeinu's. So let me say it outside, we'll see it inside. This is going to be the Mishnah in Amud Beis. The truth is, there were two additional Shulchan Ais as you entered the room. You entered the room, I'm at the entrance. In front of me, I have, by that corner is the Shulchan, by that corner is the menorah. The whole room is empty, except obviously there's a mizbeach. The small mizbeach is also in the center. But when you walked in, there were actually two tables, one to your left and one to your right, one of silver and one of gold. And the Kohanim on Shabbos, when they would enter with the fresh bread. The older bread is on the shulchan. They're going to go and do a swap. What they would do is they would place the bread down when they entered the room to gather themselves, Rashi says, if they were tired, to make sure that they, sometimes it's a big bag, so they would put it down on the silver table. They would then carry it, go to the new table, switch, and then as they were walking out, they would place the new bread on the golden table on the back. Now, the reason why they would do this is because you can't eat the bread until you burn the frankincense, which could take 5 minutes. So they would sit there waiting while they were burning the frankincense, and then they would get the go-ahead. It's burnt. All right, now we can take it out. So there were two additional tables, not the shulchan, but two setup tables. One that they would place it down when they entered, and one that they would let it rest when they would leave. The new bread and the old bread.
What are they doing with the old bread?
No, so one second. So again, you walk in, you have the actual shulchan, it has the bread. We do the swap.
All right.
I wait for the bazikin to be done, and then the kahanim would eat it. They would cut it up, and each kind would get a little piece.
Then they would put the new bread.
No, they would put the new bread already, right away, as we'll see. There was an instant boom, 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 but they would take the new bread, but they couldn't eat it yet because they would have to burn the frankincense. That'd take 5 minutes. They would rest it on this small setup table. So the point is, the answer is when the pasuk says Shulchan Ais, it's not what you're thinking. It's referring to those backup, those resting tables. So it's not a shaila. Really, there was only one shulchan that was used, the shulchan of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's a Shulchan Ais were used. It's not referring to the shulchan, it's referring to the setup tables that they would rest the bread on while they were in the process, the ceremony. The Gemara says, Lo hayu misajin el shel Moshe. Says Rav Yossi bar Yehuda, the truth is the only shulchan that they would use was Moshe Rabbeinu's shulchan. Elamani mekayim the shulchanos aleim alchem aponim. Doesn't the pasuk say shulchanos? Elu shloisha shulchanos shei b'mikdash, because they were an additional two, not actual shulchanos, but tables that they would rest the bread on. Shnaim shayu b'ulam, two that were in the ulam b'mifnim, within. El pesach habayis echad shel kesef. When you walked in to your left, there was a silver one. Ve'echad shel zav, and when you left on your right, again when you entered left and right, gold, silver and gold. And the Gemara says eshel zav b'siyaso. Ashel kesef noisin lechem aponim b'knisaso. When they entered with the new bread, they would rest it on the silver table. Rashi says over here the purpose of resting it was just because if they were tired. Rashi in Amud Beis says the purpose of resting it was to show Mailan v'kodesh ve'in maridin, that you rested on silver and then you rested on gold. The point is they rested it on silver when they entered the room. V'ashel zav b'siyaso, and when they were leaving, they rested it on gold. Now, why is it that you start with silver and you end with gold? Because Mailan v'kodesh ve'loy maridin. Because anytime you deal with karbanos, we always go up in kedusha, up in chashivas. So you rest it on silver, but you end up resting it on gold. Yeah. It's not the same bread, but it's the ceremony. The lechem aponim, you begin with silver, and then you end with gold.
That means that in those days, silver was a higher value than the gold was?
No. Ma'alim HaKodesh, you go up. No, gold is always more chashiv. Always. So you rest it on silver, you start low, and then you go up in Kedusha, and then you go to gold. The Gemara says, in addition to those resting tables, there was the classic shulchan of Moshe Rabbeinu. Umenol and Marid, and how do I know that Mylin v'kodesh, you go up in Kedusha and go up in Chashivas, but you don't go down? Where's the source you don't go down? Amar Rabbi, Amar Kro. V'yokam Moshes HaMishkan v'yitin es Adana v'yasam es Krasha v'yitin es Brika v'yichach es Amudav. The pasuk says, and Moshe, it says Vayakam. He got up when he built the Mishkan. It was Vayakam. It was always considered going up. You don't go down. Uminal and the Mylin. How do I know? I mean, that means that you don't go down. Vayakam means you always have to keep that level of Maila. How do I know that you always ascend when you're dealing with Inyane Kedusha? Ravacha bar Yaakov damar Kro. Es machtoi sachatoy me'ela ben afshoisam v'asu reki pachim tzipoy lamizbeach ki ekrivim b'fnei Hashem yikotchev ois l'vnei Yisrael. The whole story is a pella. It's a hard thing to understand. But they took the pans that the Adas Koirach used to bring the Ketores, they hammered at the pans, and they used it as a cover for the Mizbeach. So that means that it started off as pans, which are a process of the carbon, but then they elevated Mylin to actually the Mizbeach. That's Mylin v'kodesh. You go from a tashmish of the carbon to the actual kli. The Gemara says, Betchila tashmishe Mizbeach. Originally it was just an accessory, just a kli. V'achshav gufo shel Mizbeach. And now it actually was turned into the guf because it was used as the plating. The point is, you see that it's Mylin v'kodesh. You go up. Yeah, there was the machtas, that the pans that they were using for the ketairos. It had the status, of it in Nani Kedusha, and it was hammered out, and it was used as the test, the famous test with Kairach and Aaron.
So then they hammered it out.
Yeah, it's the pasuk. Yeah. So the Gemara says the point is that you see that you go from the tashmish to the kli itself. Now, there are similar halacha that you don't go down. Asher shibarta v'samtem ba'aron. They broke the luchais, and the luchais that were broken were placed in the same aron. Tani deber Rav Yosef melamed shaluchas hashiver luchais menachem ba'aron. That the broken luchais were sitting next to the luchais itself. Why? Why didn't they be placed in a different thing? Because once the luchais are placed in the aron, even though they're broken, ma'ilin v'kodesh re'maridin, we don't go down. It's a similar halacha. Now, Gemara says, Rav Yosef inferred from this, Mekan l'talmud chacham sheshachach talmuda imach mas oinsai. You see from here that if a talmud chacham forgets his learning, but never he has dementia, the halacha is she'ein noigim by minig bezayin. You still have to respect him. He doesn't have the luchas anymore, but the broken luchas is still somewhere there, and in the aron itself, there was the luchas and the broken luchas together. Simin bittel sarach v'shakach. Amrish lakish. Now that we mentioned forgetting learning, we're going to mention halacha. Amrish lakish. Go to the next page. Pa'amim shebitule shel Torah zeh sayda. Sometimes breaking Torah, it maintains Torah. What's an example? Sometimes bittul Torah is the best thing. It doesn't mean like you're burnt out. So Rashi says the example is you have a levaya of a Talmid Chacham, so you're going to stop learning to go to levaya. You say, well, why should I stop learning? The answer is because that itself, showing the kavod Torah, itself motivates you to learn more. So that bittul Torah actually is the kiyam Torah, to show chashivas Torah. Where do I find that sometimes breaking the Torah actually extends the Torah's longevity? Asher shivarta. Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchais, and whatever the pshat is, that itself was the best thing. The Gemara says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe Yashakayach Shashibarta. It wasn't just Moshe Rabbeinu doing it. Hashem said Yashakayach. I agree with you. The Gemara says, V'amar Rish Lakish, the second teaching of Rish Lakish, Talmid Chacham Shesarach. It's interesting. If you have a Talmid Chacham that a scandal happens, the bad Talmid Chacham, he goes off. The halach is Ein Mevazan Oiseh B'Farhesya. You don't publicize it. Because the notion is you want to publicize it to show that he's a crook. On the other hand, the problem is what it does is it creates, in the average person's mind, it makes them more jaded and it makes them respect Rabbanim less. So if you have it, deal with it, but you deal with the scandal a little bit more privately. You you take care of it. You don't sweep it under the rug, but you don't, it's not like the church thing, but you take care of it, but you don't have to publicize it, in the beginning of the yeshiva world. Take care of it, but take care of it at night. A third teaching. Anyone who forgets his learning is over a lav. Now, what do you mean you forget your learning over a lav? What do I mean? It's not my fault. I don't have a good memory. You don't chazer. If you sort of actively not review your learning, you're over a lav. Now, by the way, this is also the source that many poskim, Aruch HaShulchan and other poskim said, that if you do something that the Gemara says, if you engage in something that the Gemara says causes you to forget your learning, like, walking between two women, all these things, whatever the examples are of, reading a tombstone, whatever the examples are in Harius that Gemara says you forget your learning, according to some opinions, you're over alav, because you're doing something to forget your learning. The Gemara Shenemar, what's the source that you're supposed to remember Torah, and if you forget Torah, you're over alav? Because the pasuk says, Hishamar l'cha shmar nacha v'oim patishkach esadvarim, you can't forget. Now, the simple pshat of this pasuk is don't forget Har Sinai, but he's saying it doesn't mean Har Sinai, don't forget Torah. Now, where in this pasuk is there a lav? The words hishamer or pen or al are all those are all allusions to a loisase. So because this pasuk says hishamer l'cha is a loisase, so there's a loisase of forgetting Har Sinai, and not just Har Sinai, forgetting Torah. The Gemara adds, Ravina Amar hishamer upen shnei lavim ninu. It's not one lav, it's two lavim. Why? Because it says hishamer l'cha ushmar nashchoid pen. Hishamer and pen are in the same pasuk. That means that you're over two lavim. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar b'shloisha lavim. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says you're actually over three lavim. Why? Because you have hishamer l'cha, that's one. Ushmar nashcha ma'oid is two. Pen is three. So you're actually over three. Hishamer l'cha ushmar nashcha petishchach zedvar. Now yachal afilu machmas oinsai. You might think that you're over lav if it's an oinus. What if it's an oinus means? Let's say you have a person who learns so much and he chazers, he does his best, he has a bad memory. So it's an oinus. So you might think you're over lav if you try, but you're not able to remember. Talmud loymar, to that the pasuk says, pen yasuru milvavecha. Yasuru vecha means you turn your heart away. Yasirim beliba akasam adaber. Someone whose heart is against reviewing Torah, heart is against remembering Torah. But if your heart's in it, you just don't have the kalim. That's not your fault. Rav Destar, Rav Yanei Amar, Yachal Filu Takalav Mishnasai. What happens if he forgot because his... by the way, actually, oinus is much more simple. Forget about that. Just you have dementia. It's much easier. You have someone has the memory is taken away from them. So the Gemara adds, Yachal Afil talking about Mishnasai. This is the case I was talking about before. What if someone he learns so much that his brain just cannot remember all of it? He's trying. It's too much. His brain just does not have the kalim for it. Tamalema rak. That's also rak only, meaning that not all cases are over lav. This is a case where you're not over lav. Rav Yochanan, Rav Elazar, the Amar Tarvayu, Torah nitna barboim. The Torah was given in 40 days of Achanas to Har Sinai, meaning 40 days of Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. Uneshama noitze barboim, and we know that the baby is formed in 40 days. The life of the baby is formed in 40 days. I mean, there's a connection between the Nesinas HaTorah and the giving of the Neshama. The Gemara calls it the Neshama is formed in 40 days. It's a little bit, it's talking about the Nefesh HaBahamas. The Nefesh HaLikus is given much later. But the Nefesh HaBahamas, at least, is beginning to be formed in 40 days. What's the connection between the soul being formed in 40 days and the Torah being given in 40 days? If you don't guard the Torah, then Hashem takes your soul away from you. Meaning, don't think that if I don't learn Torah or if I don't keep Torah, then it's just like, okay, you'll be punished for not learning Torah. No. Hashem only gives you a soul in order to learn Torah. If there's no learning Torah, then Hashem takes away the entire project is called off. The Gemara says, Tana de Rabbi Yishmael, Mashal la'adam shemasat tzipor dar la'avdoi. The mashal is a person who has a slave and he gives him a type of bird to watch. Omar, he says to the servant, you might think that if you lose this bird, then you'll just be charged the cost of a bird. No. I'll fire you. You have no job anymore. Meaning it's deeper than just, you just don't have a bird, so then I'll charge you the bird. I'm only hired you for this. If you don't have this, then you don't have a job. So too it is. If you don't learn Torah, if you don't review Torah, that's why we have a job here. Says the Gemara, you're going to lose your job, or by an effort, maybe you lose more than this. Okay, back to the Mishnah, the process of the Shulchan. Again, let me just say this outside, it'll make it a lot easier. You have on Shabbos, they're swapping out the old bread for the new bread. So I'm going to walk in with the new bread. Well, again, the amount of people we'll talk about in a second, but basically I'm walking in, I rest it down on the silver table, make sure I get my bearings, I walk over to the Shulchan, we do a swap ceremony that you take off the new, I put on the old, I take off the old, I put on the new, and like that, as we'll see in a moment. The halacha is that the lechem has to be on the Shulchan Tamid. Tamid means always, which means that literally as I'm sliding on the new, you're sliding off the old, so that the table always has bread, not even for a second. That's the pashtus. Then we walk, I press the new bread down, burn the 2 frankincense spoons on the mizbech. I get the go ahead. I leave with the 2 bread. I leave with the new bread, the old bread, and we eat it. Okay.
They were swapping around tables.
Hmm?
If they were using different tables on rotation. then they wouldn't be-
Interesting. If they're using different tables, according to Rav Elazar ben Shamua, he must hold that it does not need to be on the table at one time. Or he holds that as long as it's on a table, it doesn't have to be on the table. Maybe it's even easier because I could just rest it down and then take it off because it's on any table at some point. Both at the same time. Or you're doing it at the same time. You're timing it, but you're like, okay, I'm standing by this table, you're standing by that table. I guess so. The Gemara says, there were additional 2 tables in the ulam. This, by the way, this Mishnah does not say silver and gold. It says marble and gold. Interesting. It's a different opinion. One,
It's the same table.
it's the same tables. Just this Mishnah calls it marble. The other one says silver. It's machlokes. The point is, you have marble for the resting, and then gold when you leave. And then you have the addition to that, you have the shulchan of Moshe Rabbeinu. That always was resting on that table were the 2 stacks of bread with the 2 spoon springs. Yes, yeah. But
You gotta skip through the other 5 on each side. to get
potentially, yeah.
So he doesn't mention that.
Yeah, because it wasn't relevant. Va'arba kehanim nichnasim. Now, the process of the ceremony was 4 kehanim entered, each one carrying a different item. So let's say, so Menachos got, I'm not going to list the people, but Reuven's got 6 bread, Shimon's got the other 6 bread, Levi's got a spoon of frankincense, Yehuda's got a spoon of frankincense, and you got 4 kehanim entering. Like that. Says the Mishnah, in addition to those 4, you had an additional 4 Kehanim enter before, because they are going to be taking off the old. One is going to take off 1 stack, the other one's going to take off another stack, one's going to take off a spoon of frankincense, the other one's going to take another spoon of frankincense. So you need 8 people to do this process fully. So basically, you'd have 4 people would be standing on one side of the table, the other 4 would be on the other side of the table, and they would smoothly transition of, I'm putting on the new as you're taking off the old. It says the Mishnah, the bread would literally be touching each other because the Tanakama believes, I don't know.
You walk in, and he puts the tape, he puts the stuff.
Yeah, forget about that. Get to the shulchan. Stop. Okay, whatever. You get to the shulchan. Yeah, I'm saying, who cares about that? You get to the shulchan. Yeah. So I have bread. You're standing by the old bread. I have the new bread. As you pull it off, I'm pushing it on, so that the table mamish is bread on the table, like smooth transition. Says the Mishnah. Why? Shenemar lifonai tamid, because the bread has to be on the shulchan tamid. Tamid means constant. Now, Rav Yosi says, I disagree. I don't think tamid means like that. Tamid just means within 24 hours. So according to Rav Yosi, I could take off the bread in the morning, and I could put the new bread on 2 hours later. Tamid is, I didn't go a day without it. Tamid, that's Tamid. Rav Yosi Omer, afilu elu noitiv e'manichan afi hoisa Tamid. As we'll see in a moment, Rav Yosi has a big shita when it comes to limud HaTorah. Right? You have v'gis b'yom v'layla. You have to learn Tamid. Rav Yosi also says you can learn Shema in the morning and Shema night. It's also close enough. It's constant. Meaning, as long as you get in the morning, get in the night, that's Tamid. That's Tamid. Rav Yossi's leniency over here extends to limud HaTorah as well. Now, Yatsu, as they exited, Nesanim al Shulchan Hazar Shebulam, again, they would rest the new bread, the old bread on the golden table. Hiktiru, while they were waiting to burn the bazikin. Hachalas mischalkas lekehanim. Then after they burn the bazikin, they get the go-ahead, they would slice up the bread and give it to the kehanim to eat. Now, let's say all this is taking place on Shabbos, and this is, let's say, taking place 12 o'clock Shabbos day, right after davening, that's where they're eating the bread. But let's say it's Yom Kippur, so you can't eat until Motzei Shabbos. So you'll say, okay, let me at least cut up the bread now, distribute it, and just tell the Kehanim, don't eat it until Motzei Yom Kippur. No, the halacha is, they would not divvy out the bread until Motzei Shabbos and Motzei Yom Kippur. The reason being is because we're afraid if you give people bread on Yom Kippur and you tell them don't eat it until after Yom Kippur, it's a bad idea because they might come to eat it accidentally. So they would not slice up the bread and divvy it out until after Yom Kippur.
Regular Shabbos.
Regular Shabbos, they would do it 12 o'clock, whenever they were done, right away. I don't know. This is in the morning. It doesn't say exactly when, but probably 10 o'clock. I don't know, whatever. I don't see why they would have to be later than that. But the point is, it was after the Tamar Shel Shachar. So point is, but if it's on Yom Kippur, then they have to wait till Matzah Yom Kippur. We don't give out the bread and tell them don't eat because it's a bad idea. Now says the Mishnah, Achal Lios Erev Shabbos. It's an interesting problem. He agrees. Interesting problem. So the point is like this. If you have Yom Kippur, which is Chal, on Erev Shabbos, so one of the karbanos of Yom Kippur was a musaf. Now, the musaf generally is, when you bring it, you cook it, you give to the Kehanim what they got to eat, they cook it and they eat it. The problem is, it's Friday, but it's Yom Kippur. So they're not cooking and they're not eating anything because it's Yom Kippur. So you say, okay, so cooking matzah Yom Kippur. The problem is, matzah Yom Kippur is Shabbos. You can't cook something on Shabbos which was not brought on Shabbos. So what you have to end up doing, again, you bring the karban on Friday. So it should be eaten and consumed on Friday, but it's Yom Kippur, because it's a musaf of Yom Kippur. So they don't eat it on Yom Kippur. You have to eat it matzah Yom Kippur. Now, when Yom Kippur is on a Tuesday, perfect. Matzah Yom Kippur, right after they make Havdalah, you cook the karban and you eat it. The problem is, matzah Yom Kippur is Shabbos. It's Friday going into Shabbos. So the problem is, on Shabbos, you can't cook yesterday's karban. So you know what they had to do? They had to eat it raw. So what they would do is, the Mishnah says, the Babylonian Kehanim, apparently Babylonian Kehanim were cool. You have to not be squeamish. To eat a raw goat, you have to be a non-squeamish crowd, and apparently the Babylonian Kehanim were comfortable eating raw goat. All right, let's run through the Gemara. I want to try to get to the Mishnah. I can in about 4 minutes, so let's hold on. It says the Gemara, Tanya, Rabbi Yosi Omer, you could take off the old bread in the morning and put the new bread on in the afternoon. It's no problem, because Tamid means within 24 hours. You don't have 24 hours idle by. It's Tamid, so doesn't that mean that the Shulchan always has bread? Means you don't go to sleep without bread on it. Meaning, there's bread in the morning and there's bread at night. So in between 5, 6 hours, 10 hours, no. Morning and night, that's Talmud. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Ami, Midvar Shor Rav Yosi Nilman. From Rav Yosi's words, we could find a tremendous heter, and that is, Afi lo shana adam el perak echad shachris, perak echad arvis, Hashem said to Yeshua, which simply pshat is an obligation to learn Torah 24/7. According to Rav Yossi, you learn Shema in the morning and Shema at night. That's limud Torah. Why Tamid? Tamid means you don't have morning and night is Tamid. So it says the Gemara, Rav Yechon Mishum Ma'yichai, I feel like Kara Adam. He said learn Torah in the morning, learn Torah at night. Rishon B'Chai says I'll tell you a bigger hatter. You don't have to learn Torah. Shema in davening is limud Torah, because Shema is also Torah. So even if you said Shema in the morning and Shema at night, Kain lo yomash. But says the Gemara, V'davar zeh asur l'arma b'fnei Amaretz. But Rav Yechon says don't tell an Amaretz this. You can't tell an Amaretz this halacha, because an Amaretz hears that you only have to read Shema at night and Shema in the morning. He's not going to learn. So the Gemara says, Rava says, I disagree. Mitzvah la'imra b'fnei Amaretz. No, you have to tell an Amaretz. Why? Because then if the Amaretz knows this, first of all, he'll know that he has still a chance, because then the Amaretz will say to himself, I can't learn, but I could at least say Shema in the morning, Shema at night, and it'll motivate him to say Shema in the morning, Shema at night. And Adarabba, once he feels he's in the game, then he'll learn more. So it's an interesting perspective about whether you tell Amaretz or not. Says the Gemara, Shol ben Dama ben Achoso Rabbi Yishmael es Rabbi Yishmael. The nephew of Rabbi Yishmael asked Rabbi Yishmael, Kigon anish lamati kol Torah kula. I've already learned kol Torah kula. Now lilmad chacham sivanas, a famous Gemara. Can I learn Greek wisdom? So he says, Karlo hamikra hazeh. He said, I'll tell you what. It's liyamish hazeh Torah picha. V'gis b'yayim v'layla. You have to learn Torah 24/7. If you could find a time that's not 24/7, you could learn chacham sivanas. Obviously it was a rhetorical response. He says, liyamish sefer Torah picha v'gis b'yayim v'layla. Tseu badix. You have to learn Torah yayim v'layla all day and all night. Shah she'ena lo yimina yayim v'layimina layla. Yilmid by chacham sivanas. If you could find time that's not day and night, you could learn Greek wisdom. Now the Gemara says this entire Gemara has been under the presumption that v'gis b'yayim v'layla and lo yamish hazeh b'Torah zeh b'picha. that when Hashem told Yeshua as they're entering Eretz Yisrael, the simple pshat is that it's a command to learn Torah 24/7. That's what we're dealing with, and how much? In morning, night, 24/7. V'chulu. Says the Gemara, this is all not like Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani. Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani says it wasn't a command; it was a promise that Hashem was saying to Yeshua, "You love Torah so much, I promise you'll remember Torah." It's not a command at all. It's not a tzivah. It was a bracha. So according to Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, the entire Gemara is it's a completely different shot. The Gemara says, "Pligid Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yonasan, pasuk ze eina lechayiv v'lei mitzvah." This pasuk is not a command to learn Torah, and it's not a mitzvah to learn Torah 24/7. Ela bracha. It's a bracha that Hashem told Yeshua that don't worry as you're entering Eretz Yisrael. I know you're worried that you're going to forget Torah because you're now the king of Klal Yisrael. Don't worry, I promise you, you'll have a good chaylik in Torah. But according to this, it's not a mitzvah at all. There's no source for Yom V'Layla. The whole thing is a different sugya. The Gemara says, "Rakadosh Baruch Hu Yeshua Hashem so Yeshua shir divrei Torah chaviv lo b'yoser." The Yeshua loved Torah. Shneim Shmarti Yeshua ben Nun Naili Yamish B'Techayil, because Yeshua's whole thing was that he was the shamish of Moshe Rabbeinu in the base medrash. He was always Moshe in the base medrash. Amalei Kadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem said to Yeshua, Kol ka chaviv lo divrei Torah. You love Torah so much. Lo yomush divrei Torah zelabicha. It's a bracha. It's not a command. Tana Rabbi Yishmael, divrei Torah lo yulach chayva. Torah should not be an obligation. V'ata Rashi lifter atzcham mehed. Meaning Torah should not be looked at as like a monetary obligation that you pay the bills. Like you get a bill from the IRS. You pay it. And okay, thank God it's done. That's not the way Torah should be. Where you have like I got to learn in the morning. Got to learn at night. No, it should be something you look forward to. Amar Chizkiya says, what does it mean? The pasuk is talking about the reward of learning Torah, and it says that he even enticed you from a narrow entrance, a broad place without constriction at its bottom. This narrow entrance with broad at the bottom is Gehenna. Because the way it works when you have a kiln is that you have a big fire and then there's a little bit of smoke that comes out. That's what Gehenna is, whatever this means. And Hashem is saying that Limud Torah protects from Gehenna. Look how different Hashem is from humans. When it comes to humanity, by us, when you have a friend who's trying to tell you have a good time, it's usually pushing you away from long life. It's the experiences that the friends are pushing you are usually trying to get you killed. It's trying to, most people that are madiach, their interest is not, you don't usually have a friend when you're in high school that says you should just eat healthy. They're telling you to eat stuff that's going to get you killed. Get you, at least cause you to not be healthy. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the opposite. He's trying to constantly give us life, push us away from Gehenna. Hashem push us away from a narrow entrance. What's a narrow entrance? Gehenna. Gehenna, which is a narrow entrance. That it's narrow entrance, but it has wide at the bottom. V'shem HaTomer, in 2 minutes. V'shem HaTomer, if you want to say, whatever this means, that you might think that Gehenna is narrow in the top, it's also narrow at the bottom. There's not room for people. No, it's wide at the bottom. There's room for everybody. And if you might think that there's no room in Gehenna for a Talmid Chacham, that a Talmid Chacham is like, Gehenna's not for me. No, it's prepared for kings as well. You might think there's no wood in it, whatever these things mean. No, there's a lot of wood there. And if you want to say that there is no reward, there's just Gehenna as a punishment, let's just finish up, just to get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that there was raw meat that they had to eat, because it was when Yom Kippur fell out on Friday, they had to eat the karba Motzei Shabbos, so they couldn't cook it. So who ate it? The Babylonians, because they were comfortable eating raw meat. Says the Gemara, it wasn't really Babylonians. Okay, I'll say this outside was an incident. Apparently Babylonians was a derogatory term that the Rabbanon gave for people. If they didn't like the Babylonians, they would say, the guy was like, the guy's was it Canadians? It was Canadians, okay? Larry, I'll get that. It was Canadians. It was a term for that you didn't like people, you just called them Babylonians. So they actually were not Babylonians. They were actually from Egypt. Apparently the Kehanim from Egypt were they were kind of gross and they were willing to eat raw meat. So the Chazal called them Babylonians. By the way, the reason why they didn't like Babylonians is because they had a taina that the Babylonians should have come from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Just to end with this, Amar Rav Rachana, just 1 minute. Amar Rav Rachana, Amar Rav Yechanan, Loi Bavaloyim Hem. These Kehanim who were eating it raw were not from Bavel, Alexandrium, they were actually from Alexandria of Egypt. Umatosha Soinu is Babylonian, but because the Chachamim didn't like the Babylonians, the Koyer Noisa Bavliim, they called them Babylonians. Tanya Mihachi, well, with this, Bryce is similarly states of Yosi Omer Loi Bavliim Hem Alexandrium, they're really from Egypt. Umatosha Soinu is Bavliim, but because the Rabbanan didn't like the Babylonians, Koyer Noisa Shem Bavliim. Amr Rav Yehuda, who was from Bavel, he felt a little better. He says, Tenuach Daiti, Shenuach Daiti. He felt a little better because he realized it wasn't really Babylonians that were doing this. It was just a derogatory term for all people he didn't like, but he said, at least it makes me feel a little better. That was stop here. Long daf.